Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank God for scheduled tweeting, so I'm not rapidly telling everyone that we're live online on other platforms. But today is a very special day. I have two wonderful guests with me. I have Matt and Dan of the New Right podcast, WRITE, not what you're usually expecting out of a Vanity Fair article. So thank you both so much for coming on.
Oh, of course, Prudentialist.
Very
it's
welcome.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us. You got a
Yeah.
great stream going here. We're excited to be part of it today.
Oh, great. So for those of my audience who may not know who you guys are, if you want to just give yourselves a brief introduction of yourselves and then the podcast and what you guys do.
Sure. Dan, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So New Right, we are we call ourselves a dissident arts and culture podcast. What we do and have been doing since we started is basically Matt and I recognized that the writing and culture industry obviously is fully colonized by GAE, whatever you want to call it. And as a result, I mean, this is bad for many reasons, but one of the most important reasons is good art isn't possible, really, in the professional culture industry. And so Matt and I connected over this, and we realized that there was a market for a podcast that discusses both this situation, but also provides a platform to highlight artists, writers, what have you, who are doing this really good work of creating art outside of the mainstream. And that is kind of our mission, to highlight artists who are doing the good work of good art.
We first crossed each other's paths in March or so of 2021 last year. We did our first episode. Gosh, I don't have the date off the top of my head, but it was almost exactly a year ago. So we're going on and closing out year one of New Right Pod. Dan and I came across each other on Justin Murphy's forum, Indie Thinkers, which neither of us are super active on it anymore, but I think we both kind of feel we got what we wanted out of it by meeting each other and making this podcast. But basically, it's just a forum where people in this, I don't know how many of your listeners know who Justin Murphy is. He's kind of a ex-academic who's kind of become more of a blogger, and like-minded people to him have kind of congregated on this forum, and that's where we crossed paths. And as Dan said, we bonded over mutually. Well, in fact, both of us notably had novels written that we had not really been able to find a home for. And well, I mean, obviously that's always going to be hard anyway, but neither of us had found a home for them in like the mainstream publishing world, but moreover, didn't even know where we'd begin to get them out there. I had already signed on to publish my novel Dragon Day with Terror House, which ended up coming out in June of last year. Dan had a novel as well, which I'll let him speak on, but that he was kind of still looking for a home for at the time. Now is also coming out with Matt Forney's Terror House. But if you want to talk about
common thread.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we met on Justin's forum, and I mean, I think what Justin is doing is great. He's creating a kind of, and this is something that you're increasingly seeing. Call it an industry, call it what you will, but there is a kind of business developing over connecting like-minded people as public institutions and public-facing, groups are increasingly places where you can't share your opinions. You can't really connect with people who see the world the way you do. People like Justin kind of bridge that gap. And so as a consequence of joining that forum, Matt and I met each other, and we, immediately connected over the fact that I had a kind of like unpublishable novel, and Matt had written an unpublishable novel that was about to be published by Terror House. And so, my novel Nutcracker is coming out from Terror House in the fall, so very soon. And it's just kind of a real kind of cement that kind of grew the podcast and united us together was our struggle to write in a vacuum outside of the writing industry, and to find a venue to get our art and our words out there. And yeah, so from that we realized that, like, in fact, I believe Matt was saying like how difficult it was to promote Dragon Day, his very good novel, how difficult it was to find podcasts to go on and promote it. And out of that,
Yeah.
we realized like, well, we need to make a podcast where people can do that, where the Matt Pegasus of the future can promote their Dragon Days.
Yeah,
And
that's another piece of the puzzle, certainly. Go on, Dan. Sorry.
and yeah, and so like I've used New Right to promote Nutcracker, and I think somewhat effectively. So when it actually comes out in the fall, it will have an audience, and that's great, and that's better than most publishers do. Like most small presses, or well, okay, Terror House probably fits that definition, but like I mean, and we'll get into this later in the conversation, but uh, often now the onus is on the author to build his own audience. And in a sense, like I think we both, by recognizing that early, we are kind of early adopters to this new ecosystem, or if not early, early in the grand scheme of things. And it's where we want to be.
Well, yeah, I've noticed the growth of Terror House Press as of late, but I mean, there's been independently since I've been around, which has not been very long. I'm coming up on 2 years, really, and between various niche publishing houses, whether it's Imperium Press, Mystery Grove, Terror House, Rogue Scholar Press, there's been a rather explosion, really, not just of independently published novels or these publishing houses taking in people's books. I mean, whether it's with Terror House Press or Imperium Press publishing academic agents' work, to me, it is a sign of the times that, really the attempts at entryism is going to be very difficult in sort of the publishing industry. I think that really sort of shown itself when, there was that Joyce Carol Oates tweet about
Yeah,
basically just like white male manuscripts are just tossed to the side or into the
Yeah,
trash.
you're right.
And
absolutely.
so, in this age, if you want to be an artist or if you want to be a writer of sorts, I mean, there's plenty to go into with the return of the blogosphere. But I thought that, so many guys these days kind of have to build a personality with their very nice. But have so much to do in regards to building a personality, building a brand, and then you can hawk a book. The meme on Twitter is that you get to 10K and then you can start shilling your book because you've established some sort of authority. But I mean, plenty of people don't do that, even regardless of which is why I thought the first point I wanted to bring up was just sort of this phenomena of the self-published man, because there are so many tools available now for guys to just put their book out there, regardless of whether or not they have a following or not.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's kind of Delicious Tacos talks humorously about this sometimes. There's less and less of a stigma to putting your own work out there. There used to be, growing up, even going back like 5 years, there was a really big stigma, I would say, to having a self-published book. You look like, it wasn't a bad thing, but it was like, oh, that you have like some hobby and you have like this like shittily printed. Sorry, I don't know if we can curse on this stream. I apologize.
You're fine.
Some cruddily like put together book and like, oh, it's yours. But no, and it's it wasn't really certainly not really respected by anyone who took books super seriously or literature. But increasingly, I think it's like kind of cool, and people like Delicious Tacos and Terror House and its way to sort of perhaps pave the way for this, where it's like sort of cool. I mean, I think because of the Joyce Carol Oates thing you mentioned, what manuscripts by white males are shoved to the side. There's an understanding that the publishing industry, even like the indie publishing industry, is not putting all the work out there that it could be. It's not, it's the criteria it's using to select manuscripts isn't necessarily quality alone, shall we say. Given that everyone understands that, I think even liberals understand that. It's kind of understood that there can be someone like a Delicious Tacos who puts, his own books out there. And, I think it's kind of like it used to be like, oh, you're a self-published author. Like, oh, you couldn't find a place to publish your work. Now there's almost more like a punk zine mentality where it's like, oh, yeah, it's DIY. You have to do it yourself because that's the only way your message was edgy enough that you had to get it out there that way. Your book was edgy enough that you had to self-publish. There's like a reflexive understanding of that, And I think it's really taken that stigma away to a large degree.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it kind of
definitely a
has
cachet.
it
Sorry,
has
go on.
a shock jock mentality to it, really, where I feel very often that in these times with the internet, there's really just a flourishing of, zine culture is back, the edgy or shocking personality that has a book or a podcast or some sort of, broadcast is out there. And this, I think, is fulfilling a very important niche, because the discussion of art in sort of the day and age where everything meets these sort of formulaic people's a flat design or your typical I guess your show, or the certain appropriated words are being said, the right sort of liturgics almost have to be put into every television show, every commercial. It's always
Right.
Yeah.
the dingy, white dad that can't get anything figured out right, or like the girl boss younger daughter has to school their parents about why the eco-friendly Beyond Meat product is appropriate. And so it's just like, yeah, we're really now in a position where you do need someone to be rambunctious enough to put their stuff out there, for sure. And I mean, that's the thing that really just comes to mind in that regard. And I think that
Yeah.
the guys that you've interviewed, for sure, right, has definitely been something out there. I mean, I'm on Twitter following these guys all regularly, whether it's Billy Pratt, Delicious Tacos, and the rest. Like the self-published man is the sort of epitome of that. You're a guy that's kind of like made it on the online sphere, or that your stuff is worth talking about because, oh, it's out there, it's done by himself,
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
the freedom that provides, like as you say, the culture industry right now is such that all the stereotypes about like white men are dumb, which obviously is not true, and like various other kind of like tropes that they kind of mix into their, message. I mean, not only is that pernicious, and of course it is, but in addition to that, it's stifling for art. Like art, art right now in the mainstream industry has to follow a script, and the script is very limiting, and it prevents the ability of the truth telling. And so if you can't tell the truth in art, it's pretty boring art. So what I think self-publishing has done is it's freed people like Delicious Tacos, like Mike Ma, like BAP, famously,
Yeah.
to tell the truth, and thus to make good art. And so Matt and I were talking about this before the episode, how there are benefits to having gatekeepers, but the issue is today there are no based or conservative institutions. There are no publishing houses that would serve as effective gatekeepers for us. The publishing houses, all they do is keep us out of the industry. So they're garbage. So we don't want to participate in that industry. So what we have here is, like, if we have to choose between a culture and an industry that gatekeeps us out of it, and a kind of parallel industry that provides perfect freedom, well, the perfect freedom is the choice to make. And as a result, you have art that is, maybe in some respects a little unpolished, but it is raw. It is like, it has a vitality that the stuff being published in the mainstream industry, that's just like these kind of stories about, women having, weird encounters on vacations. Like, it's not, it's not something that generally is that vital. Is that like, charged with, whereas like the stuff that Tacos writes, it bursts out of the page. You're reading it and you're like, holy shit, this guy is like, he's living life. He has a lot of hard-won insights. And like, that's what people really want to read. And so, like, did the publishing industry used to publish stuff like this? Yes, they did. They definitely did. They don't anymore. At least not, I mean, there's some exceptions, but in general, it's very closed off. So they left a lot of money on the table, and even beyond money, Matt and I were talking about it. They left a lot of cultural capital on the table, and we're able to thankfully be in a position to pick up that cultural capital and write the novels that need to be written.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the goal with New Right and with our own publishing and our own writing has always been not merely to, publish our own writing, but to create a parallel institution and to be part and parcel of that. We're not so grandiose that we think we're the only people doing this. Obviously, as you mentioned, there's a lot of these other, publishing houses and even podcasts like Astral's podcast also has a focus on literature. These all kind of came around the same time as this explosion of kind of people having the same thought, which is often the case with, I think, cultural movements. Is a lot of people kind of come to it simultaneously and independently and start to create this ecosystem. But to get back to the point, the goal has always been to create an ecosystem, to platform people, to, as Dan mentioned earlier, kind of create the podcast that one would want. As someone who's publishing my own work, like you create the podcast that you would want there to be for you to talk about your work. It's all about creating that parallel institution and not doing it alone, doing it as part and parcel of a greater movement, but nevertheless, like taking that notion very seriously. Like we are creating, not to be gatekeepers per se, but to create a network, an institution that maybe one day will be taken more seriously.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, and I do see the sort of rise of these publishing houses and sort of even you guys. I mean, you say not gatekeepers per se, but what was once a pretty decentralized where people want to come onto the scene or, oh, I've got this book written and self-published. I mean, while that stigma certainly does shed itself because so many people who have written great books have self-published, whether it's T.R. Hudson or you guys yourselves. I mean, it's important for that centralization to take place because, I mean, if you are going to foster an ecosystem, right, there's a fine line difference between finally some good news, right, but between that or you're publishing something that sounds more and more like a Francis E. Deck rant. So, I mean, something to keep in mind.
It gets to a nuanced point about all this that kind of is weirdly analogous to political considerations, which we could or couldn't get, which we will or won't get to, depending on if it seems actually interesting. But like, there's the whole, we are kind of the right? Like we have like certain elitist values. Like we're believers in quality and like a hierarchy of work in this case. So it's like, you take the energy of something that's sort of democratic and decentralized, like self-publishing, like the internet. But the hope isn't just to celebrate, like, oh, now it's definitely not the thought like, oh, now everyone can publish, so everything's great. That's definitely not the be all end all. It's more like everyone can publish now, so there's opportunity to create something new. And like, there's a downside to it too, which is that there's going to be a lot of work to sift through and a lot of people trying to get their voices out there. It's going to be a bit of a rat race. Not all of it's going to be quality, and if it's some of it's, I'm sure a lot of this experience that's online, like you kind of feel like you're just getting sucked into, just the ocean of people out there vying for attention. There's obviously a downside to that, but the hope is, and the political analogy would be, sort of like a populist like Trump, I guess, trying to, appealing to sort of democratic mass culture type values. But the goal, and I won't even opine on whether or not Trump did or didn't or will or won't achieve this. But the goal is to kind of create something that is actually hierarchical, but new out of that. It's a little bit abstract, but do you kind of understand what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, no, I mean, that's sort of the point is that you do want to have these sort of vanguard points, whether it's publishers or more established authors leading the way to create that ecosystem. I think someone in the comments said it best, that you're sort of making the garden in which gates will be erected to protect. And I think that that's kind of where we're getting at now with the rise of these things. Because I mean,
absolutely.
Very eloquently put, whoever that was.
Yeah. And I find that...
Yeah, go on.
Oh, well, yeah, no, I do find that to be sort of correct because there has been this explosive growth of literature, but also art on this side, which to me, I think is a good thing, right? Because there's been so much discussion about, well, what is, art supposed to be for those that don't agree with the current system or the current cultural zeitgeist. I mean, it's been talked about before. I mean, there was that rather recent sort of spat back and forth between Anthony Fantano and Michael J. Knowles, where
Mm.
I mean it's been talked about by others, but I mean just the whole
no,
basic
actually,
point.
I didn't know if you want to unpack that, because
Sure.
I know who Anthony Fantano is, and I'm always down for a little. Well, I shouldn't say that, but I'm curious what he said or did now.
Oh, well, you know, basically Michael J. Knowles sort of has made the same boomer conservative point that modern art and why it can't be like the greats, and Anthony Fantano just replies saying, well, like, this again just proves my point that like conservatives are constitutionally enabled to like create good work or art by themselves. The distributist has talked about this before. He did a video on it, which I thought was pretty good. He was talking about the sort of the heart reset, but basically that we're in this sort of vibe shift where there is a lot more of a focus on what art looks like, and I think that the ecosystem that is out there is beginning to have that discussion. I mean, I Am 1776 has been sort of kicking off that discourse a lot, and
yes, definitely shout out to
know,
Man's World, Rag Nationalist magazine, which publishes fiction as well as nonfiction. But go on.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's great. I read the PDFs every time that they come out. And so just your sort of culture becomes rather absent to the mainstream. And I think that by nature of it being sort of this secluded alternative to what's out there, I mean, it's definitely its own ecosystem. Like I get asked sometimes, well, like, you should really watch this television show. And I'm just like, I really don't watch a lot of TV anymore, because it's just like I'm either listening to other people's work or I'm watching something that someone's put out, you know. And so it's just like you have created your own ecosystem in doing that, right? And so I do think that in that regard, what you guys are doing, and by the amount of art that's out there, I mean, whether it's Wide Dog or the Passage Prize, that there is a renewed discussion that, oh, there is this avenue that's out there. It's just its own ecosystem had to be created first.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's an area right now where I think it's a very exciting time, because you have this period of explosive growth. And, you know, there's so many people writing novels now. There's so many people writing poetry, even people, you know, putting on theater productions, even people, you know, talking about, well, not even talking about, producing films. Like in Austin, the debut of the Alex Jones film. And stuff of that nature. Amanda Milius has a conservative film company. And so that it's kind of, you know, a pre-Renaissance era almost, of just like ferment and people contributing to something that doesn't yet have the fences, you know, but as we're building the fences. And that's an interesting place to be, because you have people who are saying like, well, no, this is what right-wing art is supposed to be about. And then you have other people who are saying, no, this is what it's supposed to be about. And I think ultimately, you know, it sounds trite, but many people can be right. There's no one kind of avenue to the truth about whatever it is we're doing. And that the only thing that like is really, you know, 100% true is that we need more podcasts, like you're right, to you know, talk about this and kind of like craft the contours of what's to come.
Yeah, and not to sound too liberal about it, but I think one theory that I would push forward is, like, regardless of what right-wing art, quote unquote, looks like, I think what creates what leads to renaissances, and I do think we're in the, as Dan said, you know, a kind of pre-Renaissance phase with this. What leads to it is a degree of freedom, and the, you know, the you know, freedom of expression, and, you know, the willingness on people's part to say and platform and hear societally verboten topics. And, you know, regardless of whether or not it's about creating capital R right-wing art, what it's definitely about is kind of tapping into that energy of, you know, kind of what goes against you know, the norms. And that I'm not necessarily saying that's valuable. It would be kind of lib of me to say that's valuable in and of itself, you know, the power of transgression or whatever. But certainly it can be said that right now, as so many people have talked about, whether it's Zero HP or Lomez with the Passage Prize, you know, Exit the Longhouse. Right now, the norms are kind of that, you know, Bugman. What you said in your notes, Prudentialist, like about the kind of like flatness of current culture. The oppressive forces are not conservative. They are whatever you want to call, the longhouse thing. Some have called it neoliberalism, which is an overused word. That stifling energy that I think we all know what I'm talking about here.
I've
it what you
said
will.
at this point that like the Kierkegaardian concept of the leveling, sort of taking away the uniqueness of individuals and human beings and what it means to have culture. I mean, that's basically happening right now. It's making everyone fake and gay, and I don't think that's the way Kierkegaard probably thought it out. But I mean, here's where we are. And that's the thing, though. What I see about this art being created and these books being written, like, I am not one to. And I think everyone knows this by now, at least anyone who's watched me for a while. I am not a fan of like digital or media that I don't physically own. I like buying things that are like physical and tangible that I own. I mean, everyone should be doing this, right? Because I mean, it's very easy to watch a streaming service edit or remove episodes of TV shows and things like that. But I mean, there is power though in the transgression that is out there. What is transgressive? I can't help but think of the meme magic of 2016. I mean, a lot of that was online in its essence, but I think you're kind of seeing that come into the meat space. I mean, the greatest piece of performance art wasn't "He Will Not Divide Us" by Shia LaBeouf. It was the constant trolling and capturing the flag that came with Shia LaBeouf and just sort of the autism of trying to like triangulate where these like flags were located across the US and other parts of the world. And now that we're seeing that take place in sort of the real space, I find that to be very important, that this isn't just a digital meme space or memeplex only, but like there are people I know out there that are like, oh, have you read like Viniculum by Oliver Perrin, who's semiagog, or have you read T.R. Hudson's books, or have you read Kill the Party? Like all these things are out there. And I think that that's sort of important, that there is sort of a well-to-do crowd of people that aren't just centralized in one location, right? Like the cultural centers of sort of today's zeitgeist are really located in the coasts, but now you do sort of have a much more decentralized space for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if you caught this interview. I think it was from a couple of days ago with Lomez in I Am 1776, where he says that good art, has to be grounded in nature, more or less, in biology. And I mean, you could parse what exactly that means, but I think what's important there is the ruling paradigm, the GAE paradigm, is that denies biology essentially. And if you're starting from that premise, well, then what good art could you possibly produce? Because it's already so divorced from reality. And so it is literally not based. It's based on a fiction, so it's not based. And so, like, by just even believing in basic science, believe the science, believing in basic science, the art on our side, it has the benefit of being rooted in reality, rooted in being based. And to me, that was a pretty good way for Lomez to sum it up.
Yeah, no, and I think that that's very accurate to the point that what we're currently seeing, both just culturally, but I mean, whatever is by the powers that be, what they believe in is always going to be expressed culturally, where a lot of our culture is downstream from the political paradigms that govern it. And so we're sort of seeing this inversion, this hyper real system that is out there where, things are no longer real and things are no longer based in any sort of biological truth or, the aspect of the word. None of that is out there anymore, at least in the sense that, it's kind of what like Caudell Anon says, like the woke are more correct.
Yeah. And there's something to that.
Oh, did we lose Prudentialist?
Prudentialist?
Are we
we
hijacked the stream?
I assume Prudentialist will be back.
I assume so as well. I guess we're still live.
We're still live. Here. So, yeah. No.
But no, I guess rather than... Oh, here.
All right. He's back.
Sorry about that. I don't know.
No worries.
Decided to mess up with me here.
No
My
worries.
computer is rebelling against me. It's trying to do. Apologies for that. No.
The comments say there was a coup d'état against you. I swear,
no.
we did not oust Prudentialist. He is back.
Oh, well, that would explain why. Apparently, my extensions for my Google Chrome ad blocker has crashed. That explains everything. Okay, but now that's taken care of. In that regard, then, I mean, as I was saying, so much is based on what is no longer biologically true, or depending on your religious faith tradition. In my essence, things are no longer based in the logos. Like, all of these things are a rebellion against,
Totally.
It's very much almost Milton-esque in that regard of better to reign in my own falsifications than to serve anything that is truthful. And there is an essence about all this that's being published or written that to me just says, oh, we speak truth to power, which, I mean, that used to be a very progressive turn of phrase. Oh, rebelling against the man or the powers that be. Well, the man that is rebelling against you nowadays is in a skirt and telling you to call them ma'am, and that they're in charge of, like, America's nuclear waste projects. So, maybe it is important to be a little more transgressive now than ever.
Yeah, no, that's the fundamental reversal. Where again, it's like, I don't want to say that things are, valuable just for the sake of being transgressive. But if you look at the situation, it is exit from the longhouse. Like, that is what we're up against. So, kind of just by default, there is this sort of Renaissance space sort of created out of necessity. And I think we're in the pre-Renaissance phase, because it's still the sort of chaos of a lot of different voices, vying to find their way out. And, just the cultural situation is obviously bad. Like, obviously there's a lot of repression, but, like, there's these corners where a certain kind of creativity, I do think, is flourishing. And the question is, like, what happens next? Do we overcome the status quo or not? I don't know. But definitely there's interesting developments, like even just with this sort of, I don't remember if we've really touched on this yet, but the whole sort of Red Scare pod sort of crossover with this world is interesting, because that podcast, Red Scare and other podcasts like it, really do have some valence in, if not mainstream culture, then at least with sort of more sort of indie culture, shall we say, or like subculture. And, this morning, Anna Kachian tweets that she bought the $400 Passage Prize anthology, and tweets it out, proudly. And, it's not just right-wing art, by the way. It's like, it's crossing over to people who are just looking for something more genuine, I think.
Yeah, it represents a shift of the Overton window. Matt and I were talking about this. Anna holding Passage Prize. It's like further confirmation that if we're going to say the Overton window of, like, what is acceptable by normies is Anna, well, she continually is moving right, and that's good for us, because we love our world, we love but we want access to influencing more people, and so the more people like Anna can punch right, not punch right, but shift the Overton window.
Right. Yeah.
Buy right. Yes. That's good. That's good in our estimation.
Yeah, I've noticed the increasing influence. I mean, there's been articles written about it. There was the whole Mike Crumpler thing that came out a while back, which I don't know how much we're gonna get into with that. The dime square art space, where there is sort of the there is the I have mixed feelings about it, because on one end I'm like, this is pretty neat that some of these ideas from anons and names that get discussed are coming into people that have far more IRL, or at least higher up level influence than just, say, the regular people like myself. But at the same time, I like you said, there's you don't want things to have value solely based on it being transgressive. And I've always had this sort of thought in the back of my head that my concern with some of that is that some of the people, they pour their hearts out for what they do, whether it's visual art, novels and such, that to me it does tell me that maybe I don't want politics to be sort of this exhibitionist politics is kink sort of deal where the authentic things that people really do believe in that are good and true, and they have to be anonymous about it for many reasons due to their jobs and families and whatnot, to be just seen as cultural or artistic trinkets by those with much more influence and power.
No, absolutely. Like there is a sense, like a real worry that this kind of dime square crowd or what have you are, and I've discussed this with other men on the right, are kind of like using our creative energy to kind of burnish their coolness credentials, because like the right, men and women on the right, mostly men, are outsiders legitimately, and people who are quote unquote cool, they the outsider energy, the vril, if you will, of the outsider art is that is something that they can glom onto. So yeah, there is a kind of like, okay, yeah, you can access the transgressive vril that I'm bringing, but you actually have to read my stuff. You actually have to open your mind. And I
Yeah.
think that is the bargain that the right is making with Anna Kachian. It's like,
Yeah,
okay,
I mean, I think
you
Anna's
can,
more based on that, but still, like, I know what you're saying, Dad. And people on like the R Red scare. Yeah, the bargain is like, there can be subcultural charm to the work, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, because that's genuinely how people get in. That's how you change people's minds. Sometimes is it starts with a cultural intrigue, and then later the more genuine political or spiritual even change of heart, I think,
yeah,
can take place. So I don't really have a problem with it per se. There
no
are
problem.
pitfalls to it. There are pitfalls to it. But I do, yeah. Again, I think it can, not to sound too like Gramscian or something, but it's kind of a cultural battering ram, to get on that, to be cool, basically, and have people attracted to you for that reason. Can lead to more genuine intellectual, spiritual, political changes later on. And the other thing I'd say is we're not at. I mean, this could happen in our lifetime, where like the United States kind of goes the way of Canada, and it's like kind of post-political economic zone. But we're not quite there yet. I mean, Trump's, what we all know, obviously, Trump got raided by the FBI this week. There's a midterm coming up. There's an election coming up. The political situation in the United States isn't so cold yet that we're like living under a single party system regime. Like there still is realpolitik that still is kind of downstream for some of this stuff. So as long as that's the case, I don't think it will ever just be a cultural intrigue thing. By the way, I just not to go on a tangent, but whatever happens in 2020, from now until 2024, will probably have some bearing on the future of this literary and cultural scene. Like it could blow up, or blow up negatively or positively. I mean, if Trump gets elected again in 2024, like that could be the beginning of well, I don't want to make any negative predictions or any predictions at all, really, but like, imagine what, maybe the gatekeepers have kind of lightened up over during Biden's administration, and they'll crack down really hard again. We don't know, but like the fate of this cultural scene is still, I think, tied to realpolitik, even if we don't realize it right now.
Yeah, well, I do think with the midterms coming up that Twitter we'll see more ban waves. I mean, I think everyone who's on Twitter knows that you're on borrowed time. I mean, like you are
Yeah.
living and breathing in enemy territory, and this is why I have other platforms to be on. But I mean, that's the neat thing though about the publishing houses or even what you guys are doing is that you are providing an alternate platform that is not explicitly on Twitter, and which is good because again, the time is limited. And I do think that you're right that the cultural zeitgeist, at least with whatever this movement is to be, artistically speaking, will definitely change and vary in a lot of ways depending on the what happens politically in the real world with regards to Trump and whatnot. I mean, the dark MAGA thing was definitely something that I will admit I kind of like brushed off to the side. I didn't find this particularly interesting. It definitely took off to a point now where
Yeah.
lefties doing dark Brandon and things like that. It's very funny in that regard, I think. So yeah, I do think that there will be a significant change in what lies ahead, but in the time being, right? I mean, I've seen my friend's self-published book be reviewed by everyone from, sort of like Marxoid type figures to, like the VDare crowd reviewing it. So I mean, like these
Yeah,
books have
yeah. Oh,
reach depending on
TR, of
where they get
course.
promoted.
Yeah.
Yeah, TR got promoted there. And
Yeah,
so
yeah. That was great.
yeah, it's a huge illustration of what kind of reach that these people can do, and what good work can actually, like, if you write something good, right, it's the whole if they build it they will come thing. And if you make
Yeah.
something that is authentic in that regard, then yeah, you're going to definitely make yourself out there, I think, for being
Yeah.
seen and to be known as a cultural figurehead.
That brings
Yeah,
me
no.
to something
And
that I think is very good. One of the real positives of being a kind of hunted minority is that we have each other, and we by almost by necessity, like you have to make friends because yeah, we could all lose our platforms at any time, and also just like to find someone who shares your views. Like if Matt and I, Matt lives in I don't think you'll mind my doxing
No,
your
yeah,
city,
in
Matt. Matt
California,
lives in
yeah.
yeah, Los Angeles. I live in New York, and like we're friends now. We talk all the time. I've been to LA. He's been to New York. We hang out. And like, would we be hanging out if not for politics, if not for the current
Of course
political
not, yeah.
situation? No, no. So what this has done, this current political situation, has it's created a kind of brotherhood among many of us, and that's
definitely.
why I don't fear being banned, because I know if I'm banned from Twitter, I'll just make a new account and I'll say, "Hey Matt, tell people this is me. Hey Prudentialist, tell people this is me," and eventually I'll be back. We're always back, as they say.
That is one of my favorite things about this space of Twitter is that every other day I see another tweet about help me find my friends. And
Yeah.
I don't even know if I know this person from a previous account, but I'm going to retweet it anyway, just because it's kind of like the evergreen trad thing to do while you're on Twitter. Is that someone got banned and it's a eye patch PFP or a different Apostasia, like let's go. It's
I perpetually wonder, like, if I deleted my account and then came back saying help me find my friends, if I wouldn't get even more followers.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably not,
but no, you're
wonder,
right out of that, because I mean, I had, by happenstance, I had encountered TR Hudson very early on Twitter, back when he was like still right before his book got published, and I think I bought it shortly afterwards, and I really enjoyed it. And if it weren't for that and just getting to talk to him more regularly, like he and I call each other all the time, because it's just a great way to have friendship. And so, I mean, if it really isn't for the fact that people put out what they write or what they do, then yeah, you wouldn't be making your friends along the way. And longtime viewers of my channel will know that that's sort of the biggest thing that I do hound on is that it's nice to get lost in sort of the trends or the e-drama or whatever, but at the end of the day, right, like you have to turn off your phone at night, and I think people should rather be happy with the reflection they see against the black screen of their faces, and not be digitally deracinated. And I think that's the other good thing about sort of the art scene these days as well, is that, it's not just a good meme or a good fash wave edit, although those things have some aesthetic taste. I'm still a sucker for little dark age edits in 2022. But I do think that when someone has a tangible piece of work, whether it's IM putting out their first volume of essays, or the fact that, Ending Bigly has been a hilarious success. Some of the stories in there are just fantastic. It is nice at the end of the day that like, these weird internet people that I talk to on a regular basis are actually like human beings, despite their profile pictures of their Twitter accounts or whatever they post, right? Like whether it's, draw me a gorilla or whatever. I mean, it's cool that this stuff is real. And I think that that's sort of the importance I see coming out of this, as I titled this renaissance of fiction, that things are no longer digital, things are moving very much into the meat space.
Absolutely.
No, definitely. I think if you I didn't fully get into this when we were like doing our intros earlier, but I was online and kind of in this general corner of Twitter for a couple years, let me think about this. Yeah, basically a couple of years before starting New Right, before linking up with Dan, before like this incarnation of my account and whatnot. And like, if you'd have told me the thing I would have been most surprised about, like in 2018 when I first sort of got involved, the thing I would have been most surprised about was just kind of like how generally wholesome and straightforward and like positive, like my relationships in real life, would have become based off of like this scene. I don't know, just everyone that you meet IRL, or even just people that you have like very genuine friendships with online. Like it's really, I mean, just really good people here, and like there's just that degree of trust that you have already because you're involved in something somewhat controversial.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, that would like legitimately that would have been the thing I would have been most surprised about if you told me like before, because at first it's like, oh man, this is kind of sketchy, but then it's like, it's people who are really smart and like, there's obviously some bad eggs out there, but for the most part, like really well intentioned people.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's funny because I do keep my online life very separate from my IRL and everything that I do. Just because, like, people don't. I like to think that the fact that I live two lives in that regard. But there are days where, like, inadvertently things overlap, and for instance, I'm well acquainted with like Paul Kingsnorth's work and what he writes and his essays. He had a recent one in Unheard about maturity and growing up that I just thought was fantastic. And then, the other day I'm at my post liturgy coffee hour, and my priest is all like, well, I'm reading this book of this collection of essays by Wendell Berry, and it's got this foreword by Paul Kingsnorth. And I'm like, oh, I know him. And I've been told I need to interview him. And it's just this kind of weird overlap where like, there's times where the things that you do know pierce that veil in ways that you least expect it.
Absolutely. And those are the things I was talking about with Dan ahead of this episode. Is like for as bad as 2018 versus now, when I started versus now, like for as bad as things, like in some ways things have gotten worse politically, more repressive. But I actually think back in 2018, like it was kind of like that alt-right thing going on, like it was really, really like a hot button issue, and like you did not want to be associated with the wrong people. But I feel like one of the vibe shift and just generally the way things have moved, I think that even on a mainstream basis, people are more sympathetic to like the kind of social atomization that, especially post COVID and everything, that's kind of set in. I think it's actually like a little bit more okay, to be like Catholic and take that seriously, the way that you are Prudentialist, or like people. It's not. I hesitate to be too optimistic and say that people are like more okay with the right. Certainly, you don't want to be a public Trump supporter even, or like touch on certain hot button issues. But like, yeah, there is kind of a growing space. You talk about like your post liturgy, coffee hour, like, the web of connections between that and some of the stuff we do online. And then even with some of like the vibe shift stuff with like even like Red Scare type people being more sympathetic. I mean, that it is becoming more okay to do this kind of stuff is what I'm trying to say. You have to avoid certain hot button issues. You still have to be careful, which, when and where you kind of cross over your real life with your online life. But like, it's no longer like, oh my God, they're saying this stuff online. Now it's like, I think even on a mainstream or like liberal basis, there is an understanding that like people are kind of creating, again, these kind of parallel institutions and social networks online. And I think there's kind of a growing, somewhat subterranean at this point, you're still not going to get it from the mainstream media, but like just sympathy towards kind of what we're trying to do here. Does that resonate at all?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's definitely where, like you mentioned earlier, like the Overton window has moved in a direction where some of these things are not as explicit, but I mean, they're kind of far more acceptable than I think that they used to be. Because I mean, for whatever may have came out of the 2016, 2018 through 2018 era of online politics, the Overton window has moved very far in regards to what has been said. I mean, the idea of the things that, Charlie Kirk would be griped about in 2017, that's common stuff that, everyone is talking about, including Charlie himself. And
yeah,
I mean,
it's kind of funny. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, no. And I mean, even sort of the mainstream has sort of kind of picked up on this. I mean, there's been multiple articles about the sort of weird
Yeah, no,
Catholic Twitter, or
right. That was this week,
or
yeah.
there was even a more recent one with sort of like Dime Square and Catholicism, which I'm
Yeah,
not
I
Catholic,
saw that
but
one.
it's
Oh,
something
you
that-
aren't. Sorry.
No, you're fine. But like, it's just a weird thing to see it that has come out of it. I mean, everyone from the New York Times to Default Friend is discussed about sort of these growths of how things have been nudged into that direction. And I mean, Nudge Unit's asking in the chat, like, what does it mean about this like vibe shift? And it's just the overall change of the era of politics online has definitely changed, where there's far more of this underground stuff. I mean, you guys had Stained Haynes on recently, and he was talking about like FedFest and all these things that happened in New York. And so there is this sort of growth in other places. I mean, even where I live in Texas, there's plenty of stuff going on throughout the state. And so there's sort of this recognition that, oh, things are not what they used to be politically, where things were far more hush hush. There is this sort of momentum that has kind of reached its highest amount of potential energy. And now that the ball's rolling in and people are publishing books, there's this, discussion over poetry. There's far more emphasis on art criticism. And I mean, that's a good thing to have, because you do need those things in the world. You do need to have a substantially positive cultural vision to orient towards. And so whether you're writing about the many ends of Justin Trudeau, or just the future of what the world is going to look like Automaton with T.R. Hudson, it does say a lot of what's going on.
No, I think what you have going on here is, as Matt mentioned, there are a lot of hot button issues that, we still can't, the mainstream won't really touch. But when you do have like parties going on in New York and Austin and LA, where, you can question the sincerity of some of these young people who proclaim that they're Catholics and cultural conservatives, but nevertheless, they do proclaim it, and their articles are being written about it. So on some level, there is a mainstream cultural acceptance of cultural conservatism, and that's new. That's and among the young, that's a new thing, and that is a shift of the Overton window to the right. And perhaps it will continue to shift, and we'll be in a very a time of great ferment. Shall we say?
These things are always nuanced, because it's like while the Overton window shifted right in some ways, it also shifted left in other ways. There's kind of multiple things going on at the same time at any given moment in culture, right? Like, I don't know, the mainstream media, politically, you might even say the government, not to sound like a libertarian. These things have all kind of gotten, I mean, look at Trump getting raided. Like, there's a lot of bad, but then there's also, I think on this more subterranean cultural level, there is a shift rightward. If we want to get really specific about what the vibe shift is, it's I don't even remember the guy's name. My friend Isaac Simpson, who I think might be watching right now.
He's here.
He's in the chat.
Yeah. We did a podcast with him a few weeks back. He kind of turned me on to this. I don't remember the guy's name, but there's a guy who predicted the normcore trend of the 2010s, which I wouldn't get into that, but like that was also considered to be like a real thing. Also predicted, I think he coined the term vibe shift, and it basically is what we've talked about. But suffice it to say, it's not just like something that we're kicking around frog Twitter. It's like a pretty serious cultural commentator who identified this trend as something that's kind of on the horizon, mentioning things like Catholicism and like Red Scare. We lost Prudentialist again.
Oh,
damn it.
Well,
our coup has
succeeded.
Yeah.
Keep going.
So that there is I should Google it so I can actually give people who are listening the right info. But there is like a specific route to this vibe shift idea. The other way it could be looked at is like basically to put it really simply, like the inroads made on like the post left with the new right, shall we say, following the defeat of Bernie Sanders. It kind of makes sense under a Biden presidency. I mean, because basically no one on the left was given anything that they wanted from around 2016 to 2020. A lot of them are woke. A lot of them, the left is the left. Like, some people are never going to change, but then there's also people in that crowd who are looking for new outlets and even new political ideas following,
I mean, I think Red Scare is really a great, not only test case, but like one of the nodes where they're kind of the DR kind of crosses through them into the mainstream. They launder. I mean, well, that sounds derogatory, but they make BAP. They make tacos. I don't think tacos ever needed to be laundered. But regardless, they've introduced him to a more mainstream audience, and so yeah, you see the quote unquote post left, if that's what they are, acting as a sort of entryway for the DR into the more popular culture, and that's part of this vibe shift, I would say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's like one of those things that you kind of know it when you see it. You know what I mean? Maybe that's a little bit abstract, but basically,
well, it's just about people being reasonable. I feel like there was a thread on Twitter where someone was like, "Could you red pill a girl that you're dating?" Yeah. And the answer for me was that if she is moderate, then yes, you probably could red pill her, because moderate people in general are more open-minded, and their mind hasn't been kind of like colonized by an ideology. Mm-hmm. And the basic red pill truths are essentially, facts. So like an open-minded person, a moderate person can be convinced of facts. And so I'm going to tie this back to Red Scare. Anna is kind of like an open-minded, moderate person. And so like, these red pill facts got dropped on her and she assimilated them. And now she's, a little more a woman of the right, I would say.
Yeah, there's a kind of a change, like just normies and just normal moderate people, I think, are more amenable to our ideas than they would have been 4 years ago. That's another way of looking at it. It's like in any given era, is like, are normies trending right or trending left? And it's like, I guess the idea is that now they will or may start trending right. And it looks like Prudentialist is back, so I will
welcome back, Prudentialist.
But to finish the thought, the writer is Sean Monahan, who I think coined the term vibe shift.
Yeah.
So
and I thank you guys for carrying that. Well, I had to reset my router here, but I mean, are you saying that Anna was destroyed by facts and logic?
Yes.
There you go.
I think that wrecked. I think she got wrecked, as they say.
Yeah, well, I think that can work in spaces that aren't so professional. I mean, there is something far more attractive about spaces like this than, say, Steven Crowder or Ben Shapiro going to a university talk. Because, I mean, like, yeah, it's great to record a meltdown, but whose minds did you actually change there? Or did you actually get anything out of this other than your cringe compilation? And that's like a problem that I think that there is a lot of issues in regards to recording things for your own hoity-toity regards, or like your own sort of victory porn, and that's it. Whereas I think with art, especially, right, when it's not so explicitly political, but I mean it has a political bent to it, it's just not the main underpinning, that you have the open-mindedness enough to start asking more serious questions about things like that. I mean, there's a reason why like Bronze Age mindset still gets talked about years after it came out, is because even if you read it and you think that this is a schizophrenic like 4chan shitpost, I'm still go back to it every now and then and be like, yeah, there's still something to take away here about space and what's been
definitely
taken away from us, right? And I mean, other books are starting to do that as well, which I really appreciate. Like Semiagog's book Viniculum, which I think you guys should definitely give it a read, because it's about sort of reclaiming lost works. That also leaves me with a lot to tell about what the future might hold and what people would want in that regard. But the last thing I kind of wanted to touch base on with you two gentlemen is because, as we mentioned earlier, you do need to have a sort of personality or profile to be built around you before you really can get yourself situated to hawk your book, as they like to say. Which, I mean, I get not everyone does that, but I do think that that's sort of become the best practices edition for sort of like Frog Twitter is that people stick around, get to 10K or so, and then they start putting out their book. And that also comes though with blogging, and with Substack has basically just put fire and gasoline together with the growth of the blogosphere, right? I mean, so much of that used to be from the Usenet days to Blogspot and WordPress, and now it's really just blown up in such a way that anyone and everyone has a Substack, which I think is great, because Twitter is both a wonderful but terrible medium, because it's a great way to interact and get the ideas out mimetically, but it is terrible outside of like really long tweet threads that you have to cultivate an audience for to get longer and more long form ideas out there. And I'm sure that you guys with your, and I mean, it was funny because Robert Stark mentioned you, Matt, in his recent piece about aesthetics.
Right. Oh, you read that.
Look at that. I did. I read that on stream the other day with Gio. It was a really great piece. And Robert Stark occasionally will DM me telling me things to read, and I haven't been disappointed by him since.
Yeah, he's a long-term. He was the one who got me into all this in 2018.
Yeah. Gio was informing me long-term, long time around.
Yeah,
but
10 years more.
Yeah. But I'd imagine that you guys encounter this a lot. Is that so much of the art scene or the writing and the poetry it exists now more so in blog form than it has ever before outside of, say, visual arts.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah. No, I mean, like Substack. I mean, what I think we've seen is that blogging kind of died off with the manosphere. It blogging 1.0, shall we say, and blogging 1.0, that was never really a competitor to the mainstream media industry in like 2012, 2013. But now what you have is, because the mainstream media industry is we know what it is. It, you can't express yourself freely there. So like a true parallel media industry exists now on Substack and elsewhere, where you have like people like, very kind of mainstream people like whatever people think of her, Barry Weiss or Andrew Sullivan, leaving their, newspapers and making close to $1 million a year on Substack, which is insane. Like they're both raking in like pretty close to $1 million. And, that's way more, I'm sure, than their publishers were paying them. So what we have now is like an actual profitable model of blogging that is, whose profitability depends upon the mainstream media industry being fake and gay, which it is. And because it's, it's so F&G, you have this space for people who are, want to say things that are a little spicier, a little more interesting, to, both draw more eyes, but also make more money. But we also, like, Substack is not just for people like Barry and Andrew Sullivan. It's also like Matt has a Substack, Astral has a Substack. I should probably have a Substack. And like I have
a
post coming out on Substack right after this.
Excellent.
There we go. Prudentialist has a Substack.
Gio has a Substack. Stanley Haynes has a. Sorry, I guess we can name everyone, but like kinda everyone at least potentially has a Substack. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so
I mean, there's reason to be concerned about it, where it's been the target of the Eye of Sauron for a while now, because there's always been talking about it's speech codes and what's on there, which is always the concern, right? I mean, they've been pretty adamant about sticking to their guns about what you can say on there.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, Alex Berenson and Agippius, the guys that have really been spearheading a lot of the sort of COVID narratives that are against what the state has been saying, is very illustrative of the you can make money off of there from dissent, but the question becomes, well, for how long?
I know Yarvin's a big Substacker, of course, and he's talked about how he thinks of himself, and I don't know if Substack thinks of him this way. I don't even know what the connections are between Yarvin and Substack. Yeah, maybe he even knows some people there. I don't even know. But he's kind of talked about it like he's kind of the most controversial thing that can be on Substack, perhaps. That seems to be the case, which, he is controversial. He is pretty right-wing, so.
Yeah, well,
We will see. Yeah.
he also did a huge post about like their terms and services when he started Gray Mirror. He did a long post about it, but I mean, at the same time, right? Like if you're cozy with San Francisco venture capitalists, which he certainly is, then I mean, it's probably good to have in with the guys that run Substack, which happens to be, so it is still an interesting platform.
Definitely. But to go back a step, what Dan said, I co-sign on. I mean, you kind of mentioned in your notes to us before, Prudentialist, like, the rebirth of the blogosphere. I hadn't even thought of it in those terms. I do think there is a bit of a blogging renaissance that we are in the midst of. And Dan and I discussed, I think that it is what it comes down to is the old blogosphere, was great in many ways, but yeah, it was different. It's aesthetically different and different in terms of content. It was Blogspot, it was WordPress, a lot of sites that you don't really see kicking around too much. People had their own URLs. That's not really something you see too much. It's more Substack. It was all about, and that's kind of the place that we got the manosphere from. To an extent, I'd say it's where we got Delicious Tacos from. Good work came out of that, but it kind of played itself out by around 2012, 2013. The model was very much kind of just people using the internet as a place. I mean, it sounds a little, fake and gay to say express themselves, but it was very much kind of in that, 2000s, early 2010s mindset of like, you're going to use this to just sort of express yourself or talk about things that you couldn't elsewhere. But now it really is, the difference now is that I do think, and this comes down even just to aesthetics. There's more of an emphasis on slightly shorter form stuff. Substack looks like a news site. It's kind of like Medium. Medium is another place that people blog, and sort of, I wouldn't be surprised if that was somewhat of an influence on Substack. The goal now does seem to be to properly create an alternative sort of alternative to the mainstream in terms of journalism and news and reporting, which has always been a part of the blogosphere, but I just think there's more of an emphasis on that now, and I think that's the difference.
Well, for sure, and I mean that's something that I do think that we are seeing the return of. I mean, the reason why I find Substack to be filling a specific niche is because the blogosphere kind of dies, and this comes sort of coinciding with like the rise of YouTube politics and finding a way to successfully monetize that. You had the long form video essay or the video response, which gave way to Google Hangouts, as they used to call them, to just like, oh, I'm going to do a live stream and live streaming platforms. And then now all of a sudden, there's also this, there's a desire for live content that you can come back to because people want their friend simulator in a lot of ways. But the desire to like really put out the more long form thought out stuff emerges onto Substack, because like it's really great to write a piece on Substack knowing I don't have to spend the extra hours that are needed to edit a video or to record and then promptly yell and curse at myself for flubbing a line and then re-recording for the next 2 hours. Like, that's something. There's some insider info for the audience there. This is what I do. But yeah, no, I mean, that's the nice thing about Substack is that, you can blog and do some news or do some hot takes in ways where you can do it. But I mean, it does vary in that regard as well, to where so many more people now are doing things. Like, it was kind of funny you mentioned like the manosphere as well, because I just saw the advice column from Delicious Tacos and Default Friend, where he was just like, I was like, if I could go back in time and just like ruin the manosphere meetup, including myself, like he'd do it. But I mean, that's kind of where we're at now.
I would say, I get where I think he's being a little cheeky. I get where he's coming from, but I'm happy he didn't, because I think the manosphere was a necessary step to get to where we are now. They pioneered a, sort of kind of irreverent, wild writing style. And like, I think the manosphere, my contention is that it kind of died out because the mainstream culture, it wasn't quite as repressive as it is now. So like, it had some energy, it dissipated. But because the culture industry is so F&G, we, can't publish anything there really, or anything you read there is just totally dry, totally lacks vitality. So everything is outside of it. And so I think this kind of ties into something that you were saying, Prude, about how, and maybe I'm reading more into this, but I think that the rise of blogging, the return of blogging, it's not just about Substack. It's not just about a return of blogs. It's about how everything has kind of become a blog. So like
Hmm.
you go on Twitter and like essentially what my at least my media consumption, and I think this is probably most everyone's, I'm on Twitter a lot, I'm listening to podcasts, I'm like, listening to YouTube streams. And so all of this is kind of parallel commentary, parallel content that exists parallel to or in response to the quote unquote official content. It's a blog really, and so everything is has become a blog, and that's like in a way it's kind of cool because it means that like people are taking control of their the narrative. They're taking control of, so like instead of listening to I don't know, listening to some newscaster, whether it's Fox News or whomever, I'm listening to the good old boys, and I listen to the good old boys give me the news. And you know what? I trust Bog Beef and Merrick more than I trust whoever would be the anchor on television. So it's good for me, and it's more fun too. So it's a win, I think. This blocking revolution.
Oh yeah, I mean that's the whole thing about Twitter is it was originally sold as microblogging. The whole
Yeah,
what was
yeah,
it originally, like 120 characters or less, and now it's been expanded and all that jazz. But no, I think that you're right that a lot of both the artistic platforms, but I think that because things have become so deracinated, right, that
yeah.
people are looking for a shred of authenticity. And I mean, if there's one thing that I've noticed in the short time that I've been around and now interacting with people that I used to listen to for years, is that the ones that really stick around are the ones that aren't hawking a grift or aren't they're authentic in their message because they have genuine beliefs, or that they think things through and that they're willing to adapt based upon new information, right? Like the good old boys is great not only because Bog Beef and Merrick get along so well, but it's just because like they have the unique ability, I think, in a lot of ways other commentators don't, to like really do take in new information on the fly and build off of it and synthesize, which is good because you do need that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
um and
Yeah.
so even now, right where we're at, it's in a position to where everything is kind of that slice of life that people are looking for, which is good because I mean that is also reflected both in people's novels and their artistic visual works as well. And I mean that's sort of the great thing about the meme space as well, artistically speaking, is just because that is a uniquely non-right or non, like it's not something that is really is outside of the right, I think, in a lot of regards, because what are lefty memes other than just responses to the knee-jerk truthful reactions that everyone makes out there?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But we've sort of reached a little over an hour here. I don't know how much time you gentlemen have, but I thought that this might be a good way to get in some concluding thoughts about where this sort of vibe shift is going before hitting the few super chats that came in.
Sure,
Hmm.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Uh, Go
I
for it.
yeah, I think this is kind of I we kind of laid it out earlier in this episode how the politics might kind of determine where exactly this goes. If Trump wins in 2024, maybe things get more. Maybe there's a harder crackdown on us. Maybe, but maybe because there potentially will be some levers of power in our favor, maybe things go more mainstream. But
Yeah.
that's a little kind of like I can't. Who even knows to predict what's going to happen in politics? You couldn't say. But what I think is certain is the Overton window, once opened, doesn't really shut very easily. And I think like the kind of the vibe shift, if it means that young people are becoming more culturally conservative, at least nominally so, I think this will continue. I think this is here to stay. And crucially, as long as like the mainstream art is deracinated, I think where the vibe shift goes really depends on where the right wing takes it.
Yeah,
And
I would agree with that. Yeah.
the way I see it going is um, you have a lot of different publishing houses. You have Terror House. You have I believe Passage Prize is starting its own publishing house, Passage Publishing. You have Imperium. You have Antelope Hill. You have I mean, I don't know if expat would not consider themselves to be right wing, I don't think, but dissident in some respects. And
Definitely. Bonfire is another good one
Bonfire,
that
yes, thank
sometimes
you,
gets
Matt.
left out. Yeah, they're good.
Bonfire, yeah, they
Yeah.
have a lot of great. Crucially, they published Caleb Caudell, who we've had on the pod. He's a great writer. You should read his novel, The Neighbor.
Fantastic.
Yeah, just in really one of the best novels I've read over the last year. And so, yeah, all of these publishing houses I've just named, they have very distinct voices, very distinct, like a type of project. Like, there's a novel and you're like, oh yeah, that would be a Passage publishing novel, or like, oh, that would be Terror House, or that's a rare historical right wing not fiction text, that would be Mystery Grove. So like, it's clearly like there are a lot of different, not factions, but a lot of different parties vying for a piece of the right wing art sphere. And I think I think everyone's going to find a piece.
I think so too. I don't have anything substantial to add to that. I mean, I kind of addressed it a little bit earlier. I think a lot of it does depend on where the political situation goes, and that's, I would say, extremely unpredictable right now. But just on a personal level, I think, and I would give this advice to anyone who cares to hear, who's kind of part of this scene. You just got to focus on your own work, whether it's your own podcast, your own stream, your own writing, your own Substack. You just kind of got to keep doing what got you into this in the first place, which is accessing truth and accessing truth in a way that's hopefully beneficial to readers, but also, I'm sure, as it is for me, my writing, personally beneficial. I just kind of focus on that because it's a big ocean of people out there, and we talk about the vying for attention of it all, and there's political pressures, and are there crackdowns coming? I don't know, but you just kind of gotta stay focused on that and stay focused on the work and kind of trust that will lead you to the promised land. That's not really a prediction, that's more of like a life philosophy, but a
good one.
Say, yeah, I don't. So long story short, I don't know kind of where the vibe shift is heading, but I think a lot of us have collectively done good work so far, and I think it's starting to pay off, and I think it will continue to. As Dan said, once the Overton window shifts, it doesn't really shift back, or at least not in a hurry. So I think that you just kind of gotta remain optimistic on a day-to-day level.
Yeah, no, and I mean, one of the things that I've noticed is that it also requires just the ability to go out of your way and network, but also to foster community building. I mean, one of the ways I also knew about like T.R. Hudson was because like when Bronze Age, not Bronze Age pervert, but when Zero H.P. Lovecraft made a telegram after BAP got banned from Twitter, that, he had a chat and everything opened up, and out of the blue, TR had asked if Zero H.P. Lovecraft could like look at his work. And, that was the start of that kind of relationship and the assistance to where now, Hudson is putting out like a writing sort of workshop that Zero HP is lectured with on, as a guest.
Right. Yeah.
And so and that's impressive stuff, to say the least, that you've got a community building and with great fiction and with great works that come with it. And
Absolutely.
so I do think that whatever does come from the vibe shift, right, like those established names and publishing houses are going to have a lot more weight as sort of the eye of Sauron, and is also just sort of like the mainstream press puts more and more attention onto whatever comes out of this. And one of the things that I've definitely observed is that a lot of these people do not get here alone. Like feedback is important. People continue to listen and to feedback and comments. Like to reference that Wendell Berry, him earlier. He has this great essay from years ago about why I will not buy a computer, and he talks about well, why would I deny, sort of the relationship I have with my wife to like read and edit? And I mean, that sort of also sort of behooves any sort of community to ensure that you have that sort of relationship for someone to read and edit. I've had a friend right now just go through my Substack draft as we were doing this, sending me all sorts of messages about shit I need to edit. So it's important for us to keep all that in mind, because whether you're a visual artist, there are guys out there I know that do real life concerts, that do conceptual album work and things like that, and music. All of that needs to be put out there and fostered. And so whether it is just literature and fiction, like what you guys have definitely covered, there's also the importance that it comes with all facets of fiction. And I think that we're really beginning to see, like, I would say the Renaissance is beginning to happen. You say we're sort of like at the pre-Renaissance phase, but I think that we really are seeing it emerge, where the resistance to the humans of flat design is coming out in ways that people didn't expect. The meme magic has transformed itself into very real and tangible things.
Definitely.
But I think there's been a few. I think there's one super chat that has a question for you guys. But if not, I'm going to just get through them real quick if you guys don't mind.
No problem.
Just staying on. Great. So your friend Isaac Simpson earlier sent a little hippo sticker for $4.99 US. I greatly appreciate that, Isaac. Thank you so much. I don't get to keep. I don't really keep any of this money. It all goes back into the channel or paying my out-of-pocket costs for medication. So thank you. Let's see the next one. I'm just going to scroll through so I can put them up on screen. George Sagan for $9.99 US. He says, I hate to shill, but I made a Substack for short fiction called Southern Reactionary Romance. Would love feedback from the fam. Already have the first of a trilogy going about millennial friends in the 2010s. Well, there you go. You've got your Substack out on here, Southern Reactionary Romance. George has been a watcher and a long-time listener for a while, so by all means, give him some love. And then last but not least was, let's see if I can pull it up. There we go. Alternative Avenues says, we're at a turning point in a generational conflict. Get creative and brave, everyone. My question, what are the most based video games, and do you think we'll see more based games in the future? I don't know.
Dang, I wish I could give a better,
I'm not a gamer. I am sorry. I don't,
I wish I could give a better answer, but I will say they've got to be out there. Game design is like, okay, so I'll give like a cheating answer because it's not really an answer to the question, but it's kind of the way. I want to see like what the most based movies are, and I think the reason we haven't seen as many. So we mentioned Amanda Milius earlier, and also Alex Lee Moyer. Unfortunately, and they both made great films. They are all documentaries. I'm kind of waiting for what's going to be the first like really. Now there is stuff like Dragged Across Concrete, whoever that director is, and
that's Craig Zahler. We were talking about doing a pod on him.
Yeah,
he has made some pretty, like, if there is a quote unquote alt-right director, it's probably Craig Zahler. And
probably,
we should do an episode on his stuff at some point.
We will, and just there is good TV, there's good movies, but I think we have yet to see like the non-documentary film that's like the equivalent of like Delicious Tacos or like Our Books or like A Terror House. I do think it'll come eventually, but I think the limitation is, of course, budget. Movies are hugely expensive to make, and the reason that I say this is because I think it's probably the same for video games. Like, I think that eventually there could, and perhaps will, even if it's just like a sort of indie game that,
there's lots of those. I was going to, I have an answer for that, actually.
Okay, well, I will, I mean, you can go ahead.
For based movies, though, I always just tell people to go watch Master and Commander again. Because,
that's a great one.
It doesn't need to be an explicitly political message to be incredibly based. I mean, I know a lot of people sell Master and Commander as, there's no women in the film. I mean, you should be selling Master and Commander as the fact that this is life on an English naval ship in like the Napoleonic era, and what it meant to have martial discipline and like British excellence. And like, this is my all-time favorite film. But as for video games, there are a few out there that are indie and some that are just sort of like smaller tier that aren't out there. My immediate answer would be Kingdom Come Deliverance, the Polish team that had made this, story RPG about, just this peasant guy that gets his village raided. And it's very much historically accurate, very religious in its tone and, in its language. It's a fantastic game that I would recommend. If you want something a little more indie, Countier magazine, Counter.
Oh, yeah.
They made a video game called Cuck Simulator, which is
Oh,
just
really?
I
yeah.
was almost about to mention that, but I didn't know if that was a joke.
Oh
So
no, I mean it's a game that you can
it's a
get
real
on.
game.
It's a real game.
Okay.
It's fantastic in that regard. It's just about life is it's a pretty damn good game in that regard, which I thought is well, thank you, Polish Ambassador. Kingdom Come Deliverance is a Czech game, not Polish, but thank you. But you know, the Cuck Simulator has actually had some additions in regards to like recent events with George Floyd and all that jazz. So I mean, very very funny. But I mean,
I thought that was
Oh
a
my
joke.
God.
No,
Yeah, no,
it's
I
very
thought that
it's
was a
real.
joke you could encounter, but no, it's a real. That's
Yeah, no,
interesting.
it's a real thing that you can get on Steam if you so wish. I know that the creator of the original like Deus Ex game is, you know, he's a big lefty and he's a big, you know, he thought of it as a left wing dystopia, but like I still think that the original Deus Ex that came out in like 2000 is still a very like, you know, futuristic sort of like right wing game that's out there that I think is pretty accurate to sort of like the dystopic aspects of, you know, governments taking over, globalization, all that jazz, and the lack of national and individual sovereignty. But yeah, I mean, I think we might see more, but they're going to come out of the indie scene above all else. I mean,
Yeah.
not to mention, I mean, Paradox Games has been continuously fueling right-wing map porn fantasies for over a decade now. So thanks to Crusader Kings, Hearts of Iron, all that jazz. So keep those in mind when you think about your video games. But that would be the ones to go for.
Good stuff.
Yeah, it's things to keep in mind. But Matt and Dan, thank you so much for coming on. I greatly appreciate it. I thought this was a very fun conversation. Do you have
Thank
any
you for
final
having us.
plugs or things that you'd like to promote? I have your Patreon and your guys' Twitter accounts linked down below.
Just
so
follow those.
Go on, Matt. Go.
We're on Patreon. We're also on Spotify, on Apple, on various other podcatchers that I don't even know about, but I know that our pod goes there. Check us out. We're on this. I think we'll probably do this as a simulcast and end up posting it as well. This would be like our 34th or 35th episode. We got a good back catalog to listen to. People like Raw Egg Nationalist, Zero HP Lovecraft, Billy Pratt, and others. Check us out. And yeah, my book's available on Terror House Press, and Dan's will be as well, but I will let Dan promote himself.
Yeah, so as Matt said, we have a tremendous back catalog. We have a schedule coming up. It's we're still putting the pieces together, but we have one very big novelist, one of the favorites of our scene, is probably coming on the pod. So we're very excited about that. Stay tuned. You know his name. And there's another novelist, me, Dan Baltic. Nutcranker is coming out this fall from Terror House. You should read it, and I would appreciate your thoughts. Thank you
All right.
very much, everyone.
Well, thank you all so much again for coming on, gentlemen. Their links are down below in the description. I will be back live tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern to cover international relations and affair on the Sunday stream as usual. And stay tuned. There'll be more stuff to come out, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Take care, everybody.